Dear Harry, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you for the invitation to talk to you.
Harry, let's start from the beginning. How did your Masonic journey started?
Um, well, I visited a book fair approximately 25 years ago at Lodge L'Inseparable number 12 at Bergen op Zoom in the Netherlands. I and I somehow got interested, but I did not consider myself eligible to become a member. Um, but after years of contemplation, I was initiated in 2018, almost 20 years later. Um, I've been there for a couple of years, and in 2022, I joined the Brothers of Van Aers Beieren at Putten, which is lodge number 263. It's near the Belgian border. So what I did at those two lodges was exploring masonry by writing and presenting what we call bouwstukken or construction pieces, which are discussed. So we're not trying to convince one another of a particular views. We are not debating or whatever. We call these bouwstukken comparisons or comparations rather. One of these construction pieces was the translation of the Regis poem.
Interesting. I like the fact that you're talking about translation, but before going into the translation in itself, you also mentioned that you're a poet and you explore poetry, etc. Can you tell us more about your journey into poetry?
Okay, if you've got a few hours, then um, well, I've always been an ardent reader of poetry. I've been reading poetry since the age of 17. Um, Before that age, I was already rather sensitive to nursery rhymes, which I quickly memorized as a child. So obviously, there is something in my setting that appreciates poetry in one way or another. Um, in secondary school, I was, of course, properly introduced to poetry and its history and the real poets that mattered and what have you. And when I was 17 or 18, I spent my money not on LPs, but on poetry books. Um, if you like poetry, very often the aim is to become a poet yourself. So when I was 17, I started writing poetry in Dutch. Um, but I never considered it worthy to be shared because I thought it wasn't good enough. So in 2003, which is many years later, I translated Philip Larkin, the English
Yeah.
modern poet of the 20th century. I translated Philip Larkin into Dutch, or some 30 poems of his. Um, and it was it was important for me because these poems were used in two translations, or in two, no, what, click.
Yeah.
Um, and in 2003, I translated Philip Larkin. And that turned out to be quite successful, if I may say so, because my translations were used in two books. And one of these was by David Nichols. I presume that you know David Nichols.
Yeah.
In his novel We, he quotes Larkin, and the quotation in that book was done by me. So I'm in a David Nichols book, so to speak. Um, and 10 years later, I think 2013, 14, I started writing poetry again, but this time not in Dutch. I started writing it in English. Um, and lo and behold, I also got positive reviews on that. There was a particular Belgian literary magazine which was very positive about it. One of my poems has been published in Envoy, the British literary magazine.
Wow.
But at the moment, I'm contemplating about turning back to Dutch. You know, I go back to my mother language in old age, so to speak.
Back to the point of the translation. You use the term translating the Regius poem. You're a Dutchman. How does it come that you're translating an English poem in English?
Perhaps I have to introduce it in a particular way. The Regis poem, or also known as the Halliwell manuscript, was discovered in 1842 by Mr. Halliwell. Um, and it was a poem um, which was recited probably and or read out to an audience. And that's why it's got rhyme. So if people learned the poem by heart, they could do it off the cuff, so to speak. When I saw the poem for the very first time, I Googled the poem in order to find a proper translation somewhere on the internet. And to my utter surprise, there were no translations available. There were a few prose translations and a few attempts at poetry, but the poems were mixtures of Middle English, because the poem was written in 1425. They were mixtures of Middle English and modern English. I was absolutely flabbergasted to learn that there were no proper translations. So I decided to do it myself.
Harry,
Um,
so in your effort to do this translation, you still use the rhyming approach. Why did you choose this style?
there were only prose translations and poor attempts at poetry. And if you have a Masonic poem, there should be wisdom, strength, and beauty. Now, in these prose translations, there is wisdom, there is strength, but in a prose translation, there is no real beauty. So I wanted to rekindle the beauty, bring it back into the poem, so that you got this trinity again of wisdom, strength, and beauty. And that was my main goal. I wanted Freemasons to enjoy the poem again, because if you read it in a prose version, it will not have the impact that it once had on the people that it was intended for. Being a bit of a poet myself, having some knowledge, having gained some knowledge about Middle English at university, um, I tried to do that particular job. Um, and I hope, or apparently, I have been fairly successful because the book is now at Lewis Masonic. So
Uh,
I'm very proud of that, so to speak.
Middle English, Modern English words as poet, they look into its meaning, like you mentioned, the rhyming part. What does a word represent across time? Can you give us an example of sense, how a word has evolved, of shifted in its meaning uh, in the Regius poem?
Yes, I can give you an impression of that. Um, I should perhaps first read out a few lines, 5 lines of the beginning of the poem, so that you can hear what it sounded like once in 1425. And brace for impact, or brace for impact, sorry. Um, Let me do that first, and then I'll answer your question. And after I've given these 5 lines, I will give you a translation as well, my translation, that is. Now,
Very good.
listen to this. Hús vol bothe wel rede aan het loke, he may funderite in all the boke of great lordes and ecladisse, that had he many children I fair visse, and had no rentis to fund them with. These are 5 lines from the start of the poem.
Yeah.
I'll give you a translation. Those who can read and write well may find stories in old books that tell of mighty lords and ladies too, that surely had many children who they could not maintain. I can pick out a few words that are quite familiar to Dutch people, but which the English no longer recognize because Middle English is a variety of English which is a bit closer to Dutch, to modern Dutch, than it is to modern
Okay.
English. If you have the third line of Grete Lordis and Eke Ladisse, and if you hear that the translation is of mighty lords and ladies too, there is this word too, which in the Middle English version is ik, uh, which is the Dutch word ook, which
Ah,
is almost,
yeah,
well, a bit identical, so to speak. And
yeah.
ook means also. I can give you another example. It says that hadden many children I fere I visse. You still have this word I wisse in another form, in the word wisdom, and here I wisse means certain. And the Dutch word for certain, although a bit old-fashioned, is gewis. Gewis, I wisse.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
So there are particular words in the poem that are easily recognized by the Dutch. And we also have a better feeling for the sentence constructions
I
because
see.
they are a bit more Dutch than they are English
So
nowadays.
before going and exploring part of it, can you tell me during the translation that you made, Harry, did you find any passage that really spoke to you more than any other? And if yes, could you share it with us?
Yes, Antonio, there is a particular page in the Regis poem that is one of my favorites. And I've got it here and I'll read it out to you. I'll, um, I'll do so in modern English. The 11th point is about discretion, as you may know, for a good reason. A mason to whom the craft is well known, who sees a fellow hewing a stone while on the verge of spilling it, should take action if he's up to it, and then teach him how he can avoid the work for his Lord being destroyed, and teach him in a gentle way how to, with moderate words that God will lend you. So, for the sake of him who resides above, nourish him with words of love. A point, the 11th point, that every experienced Mason should take at heart when dealing with brothers who are not masters yet. Um, I'm a teacher myself, and I know from experience that harsh instructions do not work. Um, so if you are to correct people, you've got to do so, I think, in a friendly way, which preserves the confidence or which boosts their confidence rather than makes them feel uncomfortable.
Harry, as a poet and as a translator, but looking at the rhyme, every word that a poet uses doesn't use it as a two-dimensional element, but more as a 3D, like a painter uses his brush, to stroke on a canvas and give new shades to the drawings. Uh, do you use words in the same way? Do you see words in the same way?
Yes, Antonio, there is a poem that I once wrote. It's called Colorizations, and I will read it out to you. As a note taker, I hope to be as good as the watercolorist who catches, say, a winter's afternoon in strokes that reflect brittle cold in trees, or light that has found a way through holier clouds coming in from the east. It requires familiarity with the effects of a wet brush and a skill to randomly mix colors and absorb it all. In fact, I want to preserve how and where the world left its marks and build my own colorized track, like a plein air artist who renews the conformation of our presence in plough trails, lined trees, or a distant spire.
Beautiful, Harry. Great. Thank you so much for sharing this poem with us.
You're welcome.
Harry, as an author, I am sure, once that you start working, and like you said, you're looking into coming back to your native language, like Dutch. there is the will of continuing telling a story. Have you already started a new project?
I'm working on two projects at this moment. I'm working on another construction piece. As I said, that we consider to be, will consider after the construction piece. We consider each construction piece, as I said before, to be a stone in Solomon's temple, if agreed by the brothers, of course. Um, and it's about an item in our initiation ritual to become a master. And this rather everyday object, if I may call it that, um, is something that our wives urge us to use when we dress up in the morning. Um, and this particular object is still not clear to me. I do have general knowledge of it, but I want to dig into it a bit more. And I have discovered an Argentinian poet, Jorge Luis Borges,
Yeah.
um, who has written quite a number of poems about mirrors. Um, Now, Borges was not a Mason, but nonetheless, his views on this particular element are quite interesting because the guy was blind.
Ah,
So I hope to find a few answers there. I have already found very interesting stuff, but I'm working on that in order to present it to my brothers and, um, well, to give them my view of this particular thing that we use in the rituals. And my second project is going on at this very moment. I published a Masonic novel a couple of weeks ago, and it is not about Freemasonry, but it has a Masonic background.
I see.
So if you're a Mason, you will probably recognize lots of things. If you're not a Mason, you will get an idea of what the Brotherhood is like, what their aims are, and what have you. Um, and the book is about, well, roughly about choices and the unpredictability of the results of those choices. You can make good choices, you can make bad choices, but it doesn't necessarily mean if you make a good choice that the result will also be good. And that's what more or less what the book is about. Um, and the novel is also about the interpretation of deeds or decisions. Um, And I like to think that it is actually the first Dutch novel in a full Masonic setting. Um, but I have not found evidence of that yet. But it looks pretty much that I've written something that is rather new to Dutch literature. I hope.
Well, I wish you all the best and for the success of this book, Harry.
Okay, thank you.
Harry, this ends our conversation, and I hope that we will have another opportunity, maybe with the translation of your latest book into English in the future, to talk again. But thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you too, Antonio.
Take care, and we will be talking soon.
Okay,
Bye
see
bye.
you. Bye.